If you could say any one thing about your father as a person, as a parent, what would you say that is? What legacy did he leave to Jane Chandler?
Well, like I said, Daddy's life is so amazing. It just shows that anything is possible. An uneducated boy from a fairly poor family grew up to hold the three highest offices in Texas, and did it in such a way that is so admirable to me. He, I don't think, ever compromised his integrity. That was important to him. One of the things that he mentioned about the election of 1948, and there was some name calling then. I mean, things haven't changed all that much in the last 70 or so years. But he said that he would not stoop to that level, that he did not want to win that badly. And I think that he was proud that if he lost in an honorable fashion. Well, Daddy's life is so remarkable that even if he wasn't governor, if he hadn't lost that election to LBJ, it would still be an amazing life. He was actually born in a log cabin. His only teacher growing up was his father. He had 22 months of formal school, and then he went to work. He worked on the Fred Hall Ranch as a fence rider. He carried an axe and pliers and some baling wire, and he was hired to ride the fences and mend any holes that were in there. He got paid $1 a week. He was 10 years old. He never went back to school, but he studied constantly. His family valued learning, and his father would give him books to study and then give him oral tests on what he had learned for years. He studied bookkeeping by the campfire. Daddy studied the law and went to San Antonio and passed an oral exam. Didn't go to law school per se, but he got his law license in late 1913. And he loved the law. That was his love of his life. If you ask him what he was, he would say a lawyer. He did not want to be called a politician. He said a politician was a guy who took money from the rich to buy votes from the poor and told both sides that he was on their side, and he didn't want to be called a politician. He became county attorney of Kimball County in 1914, soon after he got his law license. And one of the instructions that he was given was to wipe out the cattle theft ring that was operating in Kimball County. So he got his good friend Frank Hamer and hired him as a special investigator, rode with him around Kimball County. They discovered who had done it. The man had laid down what Daddy called a wagon sheet, we would call it a tarp, in a gate, and would drive the cattle over it so that way the tracks wouldn't show in the gate. But they caught him. Daddy remained good friends with Frank Hamer all his life. Frank Hamer is the famous Texas Ranger who killed Bonnie and Clyde. His career is just legendary. He was shot something like 17 times, killed I don't know how many men, but he and Daddy remained good friends. During the ballot box 13 controversy, Daddy asked Frank Hamer to go to Jim Wells County with him to try to find ballot box 13. He had sent lawyers down there and they refused to let them see the election results or the ballot box. And that scene where he and Frank Hamer walked down the street is something that you couldn't make up in a movie. Those two old Texas guys walking down the street. They say that Frank Hamer looked at a group of armed men and told them to move back. Daddy just stared them down. Right out of a movie. Now you can read history books and find out more about my father, but I want people to know my daddy, the man that I grew up with. It was an experience that is hard for most people to understand. When I was born, my father was almost 68 years old. My mother, not quite 38. I was born at home, which is on the ranch at Telegraph. I grew up out there. Daddy had built a house entirely out of rock because the first two houses on the site had burned down, so he wanted a house that would not burn down. The outer walls, as well as the inner walls, ceiling and floor, are all concrete and rock. Not going to burn down. But it had no heating, no cooling. We had no television, no telephone. We had no washer, no dryer. We had no household help. We did all the cleaning, cooking, yard work ourselves. Both my parents cooked. Daddy was a pretty good cook, but he had learned to cook over a campfire. So he would often grill a steak in a grill pan over the fireplace in the living room. That ranch is gorgeous. It's sort of wild and untamed. Daddy fell in love with it and bought the first piece of property out there with the proceeds from his first legal fee when he got his law license in early 1914. I did mention that we didn't have television. We did have a radio, but we were 17 miles in the country, and the radio reception was sometimes strange in the evening. We read. Daddy grew up in a time in which you recited poetry or you talked. One of the things that I shake my head about him, they refer to him as calculating Coke, this cool character. And I always thought he was sort of a romantic hero worshiper. He loved florid poems, and he knew immense amounts of them. He would sing a little bit. He didn't play a musical instrument. I was told my grandfather played the fiddle, but Daddy would sing a bit. He would do things like on the Ides of March, he would recite, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come not to praise Caesar, but to bury him." On the 18th of April, I would hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. He had a very good memory for dates. He would remember, he would say, well, this is October 16th, Ida's birthday. But almost every morning he would have sort of an announcement like that. But he liked poetry, Robert Burns, The Touch of the Master's Hand, what is it, Ozymandias, Look Upon Me, Ye Mighty in Despair, Rudyard Kipling, If. And he knew all of these things because that was how he learned growing up, was by memorization. He studied government, and he would lecture me about the history of government, and he would talk about the Roman Emperor Justinian. He would talk about Henry II of England and Simon de Montfort. He would talk about Danish laws in which they used to try the victim of a murder instead of the person who committed the murder to see what the punishment would be. But he was so interested in law and government, and he was, I guess, most drawn to Roman government and to English government. He would talk about how Rome was a fairly insignificant city-state, and the thing that enabled it to conquer the world was the form of government that they set up. He studied the national constitution, he studied the state constitution, and he knew almost immediately if a law was constitutional or not. And I think that that knowledge is what made them re-elect him. Daddy served 5 terms in the House of Representatives. In his second term, he was elected Speaker. And he was the first person in Texas politics ever elected to a second term as Speaker. And then he served another term and decided to run for Lieutenant Governor. His service in the House, some of the things that he was proud of was the driver's license bill. He wrote the driver's license bill, and he was issued the first driver's license in the state of Texas, #1. He had that license until he died. My father died in 1975, my mother in 2010. Now, Daddy's official papers are already in the state archives in Austin. But from 1947 on, he'd accumulated quite a bit, and my parents were not the type to throw anything away. Daddy was fairly orderly, but Mother was more haphazard. I tell the story about opening up a filing cabinet and finding a manila folder she had marked as important papers, and in it was a 1930-something letter from Governor Allred, a settlement letter on a lawsuit Daddy was attorney for from 1969, and her lawnmower warranty. So it was a mess. I would shake my head. Most of the papers left were in the house out there or in the law office in Junction, subject to my silverfish and weather. And I knew that something had to be done with them. I was a little surprised that there was so much stuff and that you wonderful people at the Southwest Collection were so interested in having it. But I didn't want to throw things away. Daddy is such like I said, he led such an amazing life that surely people would be interested in knowing more about him. And I hope that this collection sheds more light on his character and his amazing life.